Today I want to talk about burnout. And where I want to start is my own burnout story. So 5 years ago, we had just given birth to our son. And back at home, waiting for us was a 2-year-old. And so we were adding another life to our family. And an hour after we gave birth to that son, we put in an offer on this home, this property that I'm on right now. And that started and kicked off a 2-year renovation of a 150-year-old brick farmhouse. A ton of work going on that. It ended up being a full gut and replace. We didn't know that when we started. And not only that, but back at work, the company I work for was acquired. And that's a huge change. If you've known anyone, been a part of an acquisition or been a part of one yourself, you can know how much of a change that is. And in my spare time, I was still working on my blog that I'd been working on for 9 years. And that's a long time to write consistently about a single topic. In my case, it was craft beer. And because I was kind of not enjoying that hobby anymore, I was taking on side hustles, or I was looking for a new one, and I was actually embarked upon a year of saying yes to other opportunities, I think, to plug this gap in my life, this creative outlet. And specifically, I started this software project, and I started to map out what that would be. And I had designs for it, and I had written all the specifications for it, and I had set up a lot of the infrastructure, and I had created all the tasks and things. And I finally came up for air after a couple of months, and I looked at the size of that, and I completely burnt out. And that kicked off, kind of a year where, in retrospect, I was depressed. I burnt out and I became depressed because of it. And I want to dive deeper into each of those areas. But before I do that, I want to define the concept of self under commitment theory, the philosophy that I've been developing for the past 6 years. I define the self as all your, essential commitments in life. Not going to get bread or things like that. It's the big ones. So let's look at, my burnout story under the lens of commitments. Well, we just welcomed a new kid. It's such a huge commitment, a new life, a new human being. And not only that, we had a 2-year-old back at home, and that was a commitment that I had gained 2 years prior that I was still getting used to. And my wife was going through this change as well. So my commitments to her were changing. Before it was just me and her, and we were traveling. Well, now we had a family of 4, and that was a huge change from our commitment levels. The renovation we started, the 2-year renovation, we didn't know it was going to be 2 years when we started it, but we committed to doing this. And so once you're 1 year into it, it doesn't matter if you can see another year ahead, you have to keep showing up. There was no going back. And it wasn't just the scale of the commitment, it was every weekend showing up and having a new problem to solve, and the only option being committing to solving it. And that's a lot of commitments. And there's no break when you're going from work to here, and back and forth. Then the business I work for was acquired. Well, think about the commitments that were changing at this point in my life. So I had commitments. I worked for a software company, and we had clients, and I had to satisfy the commitments that we had to all those clients while we were going through the acquisition. The commitment to the owner, my boss, was completely shifting. It was not the commitment I had before, but now it was to ensure this acquisition and his exit went appropriately. And so that commitment shifted. And also through this process, my commitment to this new company that acquired us, that they were asking a lot of me. They also wanted the acquisition to go. And my main role in that was keeping my commitment to all my teammates and the team and the business that we had built, and managing all that because they were going through all these changes with this shift too. And so I was committed to them. And so these commitments were changing so much on that side of my life. And then on the weekends, I was coming to this house and dealing with that. And on the side project side, I was still satisfying this commitment to this blogging project that I didn't really want. And I was covering that by trying to make new commitments to new pursuits, one of which was this huge software project, which ultimately burnt me out because I said, I can't actually do this. And I haven't looked at that since then. And so just going back to the concept of self, like there's so many aspects of our life that are built out of these commitments that we have. There's a core sense of self, the commitment we have to ourself, our needs as a human being, our motivations, what we value, our aspirations in life. That's the core of our being. But all the other aspects of life, me being a husband, a father, an employee, a leader, a blogger, etc., this is also a part of my identity. People identify with these different areas of their life. I'm going to pause 1 second because my laptop turned off. And you can't ignore this. Those commitments we have are as much of a part of us and our concept of self as the commitments that we have to ourself. We can't ignore it. And so when all of your commitments in life are changing, or you're adding them, or they're stretching you in new ways, that can cause burnout. And in my case, it really did. And I want to use a metaphor to explain how I think about these kind of changes, more, visceral than just explaining the concepts. Imagine your core sense of self, being on a peg on a board, and you've rested a rubber band on it, and your rubber band is kind of like who you are in the current moment. So if you're just hanging on your core self, and you're just committed to yourself, it's loose and it's supple and it's fine. It's wobbly, but it's comfortable. Then every major commitment in your life is a different pin on a board. And every time you're in that situation and satisfying those commitments, imagine that rubber band stretching from the core sense of self to this commitment. And the further away it is, the longer that rubber band stretches. And we can stretch pretty far as human beings before we break. The ones that are really, maybe aren't stretching you, like maybe you've been with someone for 10 years and you love them, and there's nothing stretching you about that relationship and that commitment. Well, that's really close to your core sense of self. And this is why, like, initially a child might stretch you far, but once you kind of reestablish that relationship or establish that relationship and those commitments, they're a part of you. They're literally a part of you. So it becomes easier and it doesn't stretch you as far. But look at these commitments that I had when I was burning out. They were completely stretching me. And not only that, but I would go from work and I'd be stretched out here, and then I'd come to this house and I'd stretch out here. And now it's being connected between two, and it slowly kind of shifts over time. But ultimately, this rubber band is completely taut. It's never able to rest. It's never able to come back to center and just come back to your core sense of self. So we talked about that in life, gaining a new commitment, etc. But let's say you're an entrepreneur and you're embarking on a new business venture. And let's look at the aspects of your business, the commitments you have to satisfy. If you're a solopreneur, you have to do marketing. You have to do sales. You have to actually fulfill the service or product that you're doing. You have to do the finance. You have to coordinate all the administrative stuff. And each one of these areas stretches you. Now, on the positive side, you're working for yourself. So you're not super far away, but still there's constant tension in these different areas of life. And each one of these commitments is what's introducing that tension. And what happens to a rubber band at tension? Well, if you take it and you really abruptly stretch it, it'll snap. But that doesn't happen very often. Like, we're pretty adaptable as human beings. It would have to be a pretty significant change in us to create that. And that happens. Look at PTSD and things like that. That can happen. But for the rest of us, it's really more about tension over a long time scale. Because what happens to a rubber band when it's pulled at tension for a long period of time? If you've ever had something, you put a rubber band on and maybe you set it in a container for years and you came back and then you picked it up and what happens to the rubber band? It just completely crumbles. The minute you try to do something with it, it snaps or it crumbles. And that's burnout. That's what happens. This constant tension in our life between the different commitments and not ever being able to return to just a base sense of being. And when you're constantly jumping from work to home, to the kids' activities, to this date night, to trying to maintain adult relationships, adult friendships, to networking, to side hustles, we're constantly at tension and we can never rest. So what's the solution? Well, it's two things, two steps. And it sounds easy, it is easy, but in practice it's pretty hard. It's simple, but hard. You define them and you align them. So the first step, you define them. Actually sit down, take a look at all the commitments you have, write them out, all the key relationships in your life, and then write down the commitments you have in those scenarios. Defining them and putting some words around it can show you all these different things. And then the next step is aligning them. And there's 4 components to aligning them. So if we look at our core, our needs, our motivations, and our values, pay attention to the values part. Because if we have relationships in our life that don't align with our values, needs, and motivations, the core sense of self, if they're really far away, then when we're actually satisfying those commitments and living in those situations, that is high tension on our sense of self. The next part is what we're focusing on, what our aspirations, what our goals are in life. If what we're doing with our commitments doesn't match what we actually want to do in life, that also introduces a lot of tension with our sense of self. The third area is just having a commitment that's stretching our capacity. It's skills that we need, it's knowledge that we need, it's assets we need to acquire. It's maybe physical health, mental health, like different things might require different skills and abilities that we don't have, capacity that we don't have, and we need to develop. So that can stretch us. The positive side is you can do that, and then over time, the tension's not as great. But watch out for those, because if you're in an area that's really stretching you and you're stretching other areas of life, you can be really susceptible to burnout. And then the last part is just like a stability thing. The modern world is so noisy. I discussed this in the last video. And there's so much coming in that if we aren't filtering what's coming in and saying no to new commitments, or saying no to commitments that don't align to us, or taking on too much, overcommitting ourselves, etc., then that can also introduce a lot of tension, because we're just never letting ourselves get to rest. We're constantly being pulled in a different direction. That's all I have for today. I'm doing what's called a Lodestar Workshop, and I'm gathering applications for that, and the link will be in the description. This is an area that'll help you get some of those core level commitments, the stuff that I just talked about, the solution. It'll help you define those things so that you can define them and align them. And that's really the key. So if you want to apply for that workshop, check the description of the video. If you just want to learn more about commitment theory, basically what I've been talking about today, there's a lot more concepts to come. I'll be posting every week. Subscribe to the channel and stay tuned. Until next time, I appreciate you.